Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Matthew, this is an episode that I'm, again, really excited to present. I've been thinking a lot about what's going on in the world of capitalism and cannabis and dispensaries. And I've been a little disconcerted that it's all going in this one corporate model.
Oh, man, you are not alone in that fear. Let me tell you.
I'm really not alone in this world. And, I'm especially concerned about it on the East Coast. I mean, in certain states, they've made provision for independent operators. I'm not sure how that's going to succeed. I think New York is going to do a great job in their regulations, but right now it's like there's a flood of money and we have one model we're looking at. And I think it's very important to be looking at other models. So this episode, there's an incredible woman in California, an incredible group of people actually, who've started something called the People's Dispensary. And their model includes give back to communities. It's not only about taking tax revenue that, by the way, you and I supply. It's actually about they are donating a lot of their profits to making sure disenfranchised communities, people of color, people who who don't have access to capital, have a leg up in this industry. And that is a model we really need to talk about and discuss. So that's what we're going to talk about today. That's Christine De La Rosa. She's coming up right after the news. Stay tuned. It's great. So, Matthew, before we talk about Christine, I want to do the news, but I also want to make the plea one more time that up until now, we have not been sponsored. And I've been asking folks on these podcasts to help support us through Patreon. And amazingly, incredible numbers of people have stepped up and are becoming our sponsors on Patreon. And it's really heartwarming. It's really fantastic to know that we are building an actual community here. We must have about a good number now of people really supporting us. And the reason is this: we have not taken on sponsorship. We have been doing it out of our own pockets, plus with the support of our Patreon people. And really, it's in order to bring you guys the information that we're doing. We're finding people like Christine De La Rosa who are working not in the shadows, but are working in near obscurity. They don't have PR people working for them. And we want to bring these to light. We want to enable the conversations to happen that don't happen in the mainstream, that aren't happening in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. We want to be able to bring this to you, let you think about it, and encourage you to get involved in at least thinking differently. So again, folks, we're asking. We've been doing this on our own dime for a long time now, to keep the lights on, to keep the sound engineer, to keep Kyle Moore, our sound engineer, going, to keep us all going, just to pay for the website, to pay for the technical stuff we have to do just to keep it up. Please consider throwing us $1, $2, $5, $10 a month. Don't do it if you don't have the money. Keep listening. But if you have some extra change, think about it.
You know what, Joe? I was talking to one of our associate producers for the show, Alan, the other day, and he put forward the argument to me that we should actually raise the bottom tier on our Patreon to like $5. And I was looking at some other Patreons for some other podcasts, and some of them start at $10 or $20. There are people out there who are charging $50 a month for their content. And I pushed back. I'm like, no, it needs to be $1 because we want people involved in the conversation. It needs to be the bare minimum that we can ask of anyone to be a part of this conversation, to be a part of this community, to be a part of this world. So, it's less than a cup of coffee and you get 2 episodes out of the month. And we can continue to have this conversation. We can continue to have an unbiased, real conversation of our opinions and the world as we see it, without the influence of money and without the influence of some, like what you said, like the corporate takeover of the world of cannabis. It's super easy for you all to get involved in this community and to become a part of it and to support the show. All you got to do, cruise over to patreon.com/bravenewweed and become a patron today.
So Matthew, let's talk about some news.
Oh, I can't wait. So much good stuff. I got a crazy statistic for you, Joe. You ready for this?
Yep.
Would you believe that the state of Oregon has destroyed more cannabis than the weight of a Boeing 737 airplane?
Why?
They have too much. In the past 2 years, at least 150 cannabis businesses in Oregon have gone under. They are producing about 3 times more cannabis in the state of Oregon than the state could even consume, to the tune of 1.1 million pounds of marijuana in 2017.
They need to send some to Canada because they're running short.
It's against the rules. Can't ship out of state. So it's actually a combination of things. Washington and Oregon both experiencing the same growing pains, if you will, because they are overproducing cannabis. They have an overproduction. Everybody signed up. Oregon specifically had a problem with just indiscriminately issuing licenses. And they can't ship out of state. So it's actually driving trendy dispensaries and mom and pop family farms and things like that out of business because everybody's producing cannabis more than the state can consume it.
Well, this is another reason for good regulation so people can be protected. What other news items have you got?
Well, let's jump into the big story right now, which is apparently the New York Times has been taken over by a case of reefer madness. You know what I'm talking about, right? This is the article. This is now the second time that we've had to wag the finger at the New York Times over this.
They ran this piece by Alex Berenson talking about all the tragic things that are going to happen, that the murder rates are going to go up, the rates of schizophrenia are going to go up. It's the equivalent of Trump's wall, really. It's trying to create a crisis where there is none. It's trying to make people afraid where the fear, it just doesn't sound like cannabis. Everything these people are talking about, Alex Berenson, Malcolm Gladwell did this weird echo piece of it. I'm not even sure in the New Yorker. I'm not even sure what it was. Was it a book review? I don't know what it was. It seemed like Malcolm was on Alex's payroll to write this piece.
Well,
the product they're describing, the substance they're describing, has no bearing on reality. It's like the invasion of all the Latin Americans invading the country on the southern border. It has no bearing on reality.
So it all goes back to this cherry-picked set of data from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine article and report that was published in 2017, where they did a massive study. And I've tweeted out on our Twitter page a link to the actual research. And one of the authors of the study, one of the researchers, a woman by the name of Ziva Cooper, has even come out and said, no, you're misrepresenting our data. There is shown a statistical correlation between development of schizophrenia and other psychotic breaks and heavy use of cannabis. But correlation does not equal causation. And the reality of it is that they found out that people who are genetically predisposed to psychotic breaks also have a penchant to self-medicate with cannabis.
Yes,
so
this is really not news to anyone who's been looking at this over the years. But anyway, he's made a lot of news for it. I'm sure he's going to have a best-selling book, Alex Berenson, about
and that's the trick, right?
All the fears of cannabis. But there's something else we have to offer our audience, isn't there?
Yeah, I one of the people that came out immediately against it, or one of the organizations, was the Doctors For Cannabis Regulation. David Nathan, the president of the organization, was on CNN with the author and just face-to-face took him to task over bad science. And I reached out to Dr. Nathan. He was unavailable because he's currently ill. However, his partner and co-author of a letter to the editor to the New York Times, Dr. Bryon Adinoff, did take some time to sit down and discuss with me, and we've published that on our feed. So if you're a subscriber to the show or if you're a follower of the show, you probably have already heard that, or you can just navigate over to the website and you can check out that. But basically, the Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, these are scientists and psychiatrists and psychologists and medical doctors who are really representing what the data says. And they basically just say that Alex Berenson is full of crap.
So where can we find this interview that you did?
Well, it's on our feed. It'll be on the website. So bravenewweed.com. You can find that anywhere that you find us. If you're following us on Libsyn, if you're subscribed to us on Google Play or on Apple Podcasts, like it will come out along with our episodes as an addendum to this news piece.
Thank you for doing that, Matthew. There's one more thing I want to tell you. You know, when I was in California over a few weeks ago, I heard about a very interesting strain called Gummy Jam. Apparently, it was at the Emerald Cup, and it made a big splash. This is something that you and I are going to be very interested in. It's a CBDV variety with it's like maybe 1 to 20 flower CBD.
1 to 20?
20 times the CBD to THC. And
wow.
And I was told that it doesn't really create psychoactivity, but it does create a hyper-focused state. So it was in one dispensary in the Bay Area in Berkeley, CBCB, and I drove through a rainstorm there to get it. And I did. I got a few pre-rolls, and I've been experimenting with it. And it is a very interesting thing. It is as described. It is focusing, it is energizing, and it's at the same time not psychoactive. It's a very hard thing to put into words. Wow. I wish you were here to try it with me so that we could try to put it in words to our listeners. But if any of you are in Berkeley or near Berkeley and find this appealing, I would suggest you drop over. They only have it in pre-rolls. Experiment with it. Send us a note. Tell us what you think about it.
Gummy Jam. I'm going to have to look out for this. And it reminds me of something that I want to talk about with you, but I'm going to save that to the end of this podcast. Before we leave our news, and it's actually quite apt to frame it this way because the last piece of news, Joe, that I have for you is let's not forget about Asia. So this comes a hat tip to Andrew Work, who wrote to us from Hong Kong. With a couple links to some articles. Joe, the race is on to see who will be the first East Asian country to legalize medical cannabis. Right now, both South Korea, which I think that's a huge one. They're a major economic player in the world. So if South Korea, their legislature is currently working on rules for legalizing medical. But the one that shocked me is they are looking now at legalizing medical marijuana in Thailand.
Well, it's really, listen, I know of companies that are growing on the island of Vanuatu in the South Pacific. I mean, this is going to happen, and it's going to be really interesting. These are cultures that have been notoriously anti-cannabis, but very interested in plant medicines.
Mm-hmm. So super conservative cultures as well.
They have a framing issue to overcome. Like, how are they going to deal with this? But in another way, they're ripe for it. It grows in the ground. It's familiar. It's a green plant. It doesn't kill.
Well, and both of those, Thailand is a very tropical kind of equatorial zone. I bet it's just. I mean, Thailand is well known as a source for some really great cannabis, and it's strange to have that balanced with the sort of oppressive control that they have over it. It's a super no-no, against the law.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting problem they've got. They've got a lot to overcome in Asia.
So let's keep our eyes pointed a little bit east in the future and open up our news section to some of the things that are going on in Asia. And thank you again, Andrew, for writing into the show and sending us along those news links. We really appreciate it.
You can like and follow the Brave New Weed podcast on all the best social media platforms. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed, or on Twitter @bravenewweed, or Instagram @bravenewweed.
So, as mentioned at the top of the hour, I think it's crucial that we look for different models of cannabis entrepreneurship. And one of the most impressive is the People's Dispensary. It's located currently in California, but they have been asked by various states and local governments to come and talk and open dispensaries in communities that need community support. The one I interviewed the founder, Christine De La Rosa, who you will hear very shortly, and she's an entrepreneur. She has restaurants, she has an events business. She's not a stranger to making money. And she said to me point blank, look, we know how much money there is to be made in the cannabis space. And there's no reason why corporations can't give back. They can't give some percentage of their revenue back. We're not interested in putting flowers in planters on the sidewalk. We want to help people give them what they need, be it sustainable housing, be it job opportunities, be it job training. It's a very interesting model. I think Christine is a fantastic spokesperson for it, and I really hope you'll give this time and attention. It's really worth listening to.
So, Christine, so glad you could join us today. I want to start first with, what's happening with legalization is that there are so many venture-backed capitalist dispensaries opening all across the country. They're flush with cash, and they're doing very glamorous, sort of chic retail operations. Your business stands in stark opposition to that. Can you tell me how it began and why you started this particular model?
Sure. I believe that cannabis should be accessible to everybody. I also believe that people who are ill or are treating something should be able to do so. And so I came to cannabis. I was not a cannabis user before 2015. I didn't use cannabis at all, but I did in 2010 get really sick, and I have lupus. And for 5 years, I took synthetic drugs, 11 pills a day, 1 infusion a month, just to still be sick. And I really started to look for something else, and that's when I found cannabis. And cannabis really has changed my life. I take it every day. I use it medicinally. And what I realized is that there were so many people around me here in Oakland that were also really sick and also taking tons and tons of pain medication and, nerve blocking things. And I was like, wow, there's this thing that's been here all this time, cannabis. And we don't know the medicinal properties of it. We don't know how to access it. We're still, it's still considered illegal in so many states. And so when we decided to start, the 4 co-founders decided to start it, we started it from a methodology of how does this help a community? Not how do we have some glamorous paparazzi on the side of the road taking pictures of people walking into our dispensary. We're like, how do we give this access, and how do we do it in a way that is thoughtful and mindful of all of the harm the criminalization of cannabis has had on our communities.
But why start with a community focus? I mean, most businesses start with I'm giving you a hard time here because I want to know, okay? Most businesses start with a profit motive. Let's get into the black. Let's spend money. Let's get into the black. It's not the same sort of good feeling, community-based organization that you've started here.
I would say we started there because what we understood is how much money cannabis makes. So that's one of the things that's very different than I think for other dispensaries. We actually run a dispensary. We know how much money we make. We know how much money we can give back to the community and still have a home, a car, pay our bills. And I think that that's the difference from us. Like, we're not trying to be the 1%. We're trying to be part of the 99% that's making good for everybody. And this is the one industry where we can actually do that, where we can sell, make a profit, give back to the community, and uplift everybody at the same time.
So let's talk about the breakdown of how the People's Dispensary actually is owned, okay? I think you have explained that it's specifically wants to treat people who are in underserved communities. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And how does it break down? How does it actually work ownership-wise?
Sure. So currently, there's 4 co-founders that own national. We're 100% LGBTQ owned, 75% women and women of color owned. And TPD National holds all of the licenses for all of the local cities. So So, for instance, in San Francisco, we have what's called a regional co-founder. That's the co-executive directors of the African American Art and Culture Complex, Melanie and Melora Green. In LA, we have a partner there called Revolve Impact, and they work specifically with incarcerated youth. So we co-own those spaces with them, and we manage a lot of the money that they get. So we manage their investment, we manage their, if they need money, National has it, we give it to them to help them get to open. And this is what we talk about when we're talking about how do you give people of color pathways to get into the industry, especially around financing, because a lot of these folks, as you know, as you said, are corporate, and they're being financed by venture capitalists, they're being financed by Acreage, they're being financed like these huge companies. So how do you get people in communities of color, formerly incarcerated communities, to actually be able to create business in this wonderful market?
Yes, I think there's a difference, or there's a misunderstanding. People can get licenses, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can have a business that works, right? Because isn't the competitive disadvantage pretty vast between a mega company and a small independent mom and pop license holder?
Yes, it's a vastly different. But what's the thing I think that's a barrier to entry is always going to be financing. You can have, like, especially in California when they became legal, you have wonderful growers that have been growing for 60 years. It's generational growers, and they're small in their cottage, and they produce, let's say, 50 pounds every season, and they sell the 50 pounds, and that's how they build the next 50 pounds, and they pay for their house, and they have their kids, and all that good stuff. But if you don't have a pathway to financing, even if you're making that money from the growing, you still have to license. This is stuff that wasn't expenses that you had for the last 20 years. Licensing, paying for the state taxes, the city taxes, the county taxes. These are all new. So you have to go get financing. This is where we have problems, especially for people of color, LGBT people who are in the LGBTQ people who are in the industry, formerly incarcerated, and also small mom and pops, is the access to the financing. Because in any other industry, if I'm making a profit off my cultivation, I just walk into a bank like a farmer would do and say, hey, I need to get a loan against my future crop. And we cannot do that here.
So you actually provide the financing? So you work almost as a bank or a lending institution, is that correct?
Well, we don't lend money, we invest money. So what we do is that we ask our partners. So when I tell you, we have not gone into any city that hasn't asked us to be there. So Melanie and Melora from San Francisco, Revolve from LA, Fahrenheit 911 for Fresno came to us and said, hey, we like your model because your model isn't greedy. Your model isn't trying to cut small people out. Your model is actually trying to help the most people. How can we get one of this model here in our city? And so we partnered with them. So they own part of the dispensary for that city. And then we provide most of the cash, but they provide most of the social capital, right? Because they know their assemblymen, assemblywomen, senators, they know their city council people, they know the people in their community. And so we don't want to come in and be gentrified and be like, oh, we're here now with the People's Dispensary. We want to be partnered with people in the community that are activists and have value and understand the value of community organizing.
So you really are a radical, aren't you?
I really kind of am.
I really kind of love that. But something more that you do that I read also, so for example, in Oakland, where your first dispensary is or was or whatever it began, you helped to you gave some money to develop dilapidated residential complexes. That's a really interesting idea. Tell me how that works, and are you going to be a magnet in all the cities you're going to?
So actually, we have not done that. So let's be clear. That's what we're planning to do in Oakland. But what we found out as we've gone to different places in the U.S., New York included, Texas here, is that every community is different. So being able to build dilapidated housing was not actually what the community needed. And this is what I'm talking, that is when you're in a company, you should have a two-way conversation with community. And so what we've decided to do that would be helpful is that we're going to do housing stipends instead as part of the benefit package for our employees. And what that looks like, for instance, in Oakland, is that based on where you're living and what the mean is, we're going to do a 20 to 35% stipend as part of your benefits. So it's not just, it's part of the benefit package. But like in Fresno, where their rent is $500 for a 4-bedroom, they're like, we don't really need a housing stipend, but we do need help having mortgage down payments. So we'll help them do that. So every city gets to tell us what they need in terms of that housing piece for benefits. And then we'll take that into account and put it into the benefits package for that group. When we started with the dilapidated housing until they said, no, we really just need you to do this. And we want to always be mindful of hearing what our employees need and what our communities need.
Now, if I'm a worker in the People's Dispensary, which is the one in Oakland, am I an owner of that company? Am I a stockholder of that company? How is it different from me being a worker in a regular dispensary?
Sure. So all of our employees have stock options. So we set that aside early on. So they are part owner of it. It's not as much as a collective, but it's just like a stock option. It vests in 3 years, just like normal. Additionally, though, they have an opportunity to be investors in their local dispensary. So remember, TPD National sits at top, and then all of the local dispensaries sit underneath it. So we have that holding company. So they get it in the holding company no matter what, right? But then they also have an opportunity to invest in their local dispensary.
That's really fantastic. So are you making any money?
We are making a little bit of money. I don't want to lie to anybody about cannabis, especially right now. When you were talking about all of those people that are throwing billions and millions of dollars into their companies, all of them are doing that and not making any money. They're losing money because they're counting on throwing so much money that all the small people get out, and then it's just them standing, and that's what we're really fighting against. I will tell you that I think that in about 2 to 3 years, everybody who's in the cannabis industry will be making a lot of money, mostly because we will see once it's federally deregulated, 280E will no longer be in effect, and that is what makes cannabis companies not make any money.
Explain what 280E is, please.
Sure. So 280E means that you have, when you're doing your tax report, you have your gross, and then you have your net, and then you get to make all your deductions. And in companies, corporations, LLCs, they get to do that. They get to deduct their cost of goods. They get to deduct all this stuff. Well, if you are selling a Schedule I drug in the United States, you fall under the tax 80E exemption, which means 280E exemption, which means you get taxed on gross, and you get to deduct nothing.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's why I know people are not making very much money right now. They're making a lot of money gross. But then if you have to pay taxes on gross, then you're not making any money, or very little, a small sliver compared to what you could be if you were able to deduct regular, normal expenses of a business.
So one thing that's interesting is that you're LGBTQ owned, operated. Many people who work in your dispensaries are as well, which is interesting to me because I don't see a lot of representation in the cannabis industry of this community. Now, either they're there and they're invisible, which I think is the case, or they haven't been involved in it or not really welcome in it. Tell me why this is part of your model and how it came to be, please. And what's the truth?
I think the truth is that, at least in California, back in the 80s, AIDS patients were a huge reason why we had Prop 215. They were one of the catalysts, right? Because we were dying in droves. Our gay men were dying in droves, and there was no relief. I think that there's plenty of LGBTQ people in the business, but I think as it is with every different kind of industry, they're a little bit hidden because it's illegal. First of all, everybody was hidden, to be honest with you, right? But now that we're coming into the light, we're being legalized across the U.S. It was very important for us to have representation for LGBTQ people because we wanted to create spaces where they felt comfortable coming. And we all of us feel safe when we're going and comfortable when we go to places where we see ourselves reflected. And that was the big thing for us. We wanted to make sure that we were reflected and our employees reflected who we were. And that's a lot of different people. It's not just LGBTQ people. It's women. It's people of color. It's formerly incarcerated. It's chronically ill. So it's very important that we have that representation because not everybody's going to be on a yacht smoking some weed. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, but you're. It's also curious, and because you're in a city like San Francisco, which is such a strong gay population, such a gay presence, and I'm wondering why you felt the need to sort of make it explicit and focus here.
I think that for the 4 co-founders, when we talked about it, we said that we wanted to be upfront. We didn't want to hide anything. We wanted everybody to know who was investing or walking into our dispensary that they were supporting these different communities. And I think regardless of whether San Francisco is very gay or New York is very gay or even Portland, where we are now, is very gay, the thing is that being out front and saying, hey, we're 100% LGBTQ owned, it's important to be counted. And it's not, I don't think anybody should ever not be counted or by omission. You know what I mean? So like, oh, well, yes, we're all LGBTQ owned, but we're not going to say it because it might offend somebody. I think we actually have to be counted, especially in this industry.
And has it made a difference in the population, the people you're serving? Has it made a difference in the business world or a difference in the communities?
I don't know if it's made a difference in the business world. Like maybe there's somewhere somebody saying, I'm not going to go to them because they're LGBTQ owned. But I can tell you that what it has done in our communities is really uplifted the most people. We have all kinds of people come into our dispensaries, LGBTQ, trans folks, chronically disabled, veterans. And what we have found is that by being upfront and honest about who we are and how we're inclusive of everybody, but this is who owns it, I feel like people in our communities that we currently sit really appreciate that. And I have not heard any fallback of, I'm not going to go to that place because it's LGBTQ owned. But what I have heard is that I'm going to go to this place because it has my same beliefs and values.
It's nice to hear the words beliefs and values associated with cannabis because it was so much a part of the legalization movement. And one of the things that concerns me as capitalism comes in is that that's all going away. People can talk the talk, but I think we all know that talking the talk is not the same as walking the walk. Have you had any experience of this?
Oh my God, I don't want to laugh. But yes, so many times we have seen this, especially as we are in New York City with the MROs and just like seeing like the policies that they're putting forth to the legislator and seeing like the hidden ways in which they're planning basically to screw the little guy.
Now, you're not talking about the government, you're talking about the corporations themselves. Can you explain that, please?
Well, I think that the corporations are trying really hard. Like, there's certain corporations, I'm not going to name names, but like have been in existence for quite some time and have never had a person of color on their board. And this year have decided to add 2 people of color on their board. And we see them wanting to give policy to the government where it appears as if they're doing stuff for the small guy, but when you read the fine print, really they're starting a monopoly. So yes, we come across this all the time where we're like, they can't really believe we're this stupid. But it's not that. It's just that they just assume that people aren't going to read and are not going to show up. And I think what we learned in the midterm elections is that we're showing up. You're not going to be able to pass this by us anymore. We're going to be involved in policy. We're going to be involved in reading every little line item where it looks like, oh, you're giving us something. Oh, but really you're taking away this much more. I think that that's where we are as a nation.
So do you currently work with people who are creating policy? I mean, I'm very interested in this because I know regulation has a very bad name, but I actually think that if smart states get involved at the right way, they can actually carve out space for small mom and pop operators to exist. And I think that that's crucial. I think this idea of, well, my personal belief is that libertarianism is a very vacuous philosophy. The idea of just let everything go, don't regulate it, don't put any controls on anything is only going to really hurt small operators at this point. So can you talk to me a little bit about that and who you're talking to and what they want to know from you?
Sure. So what we did is we looked at New York and came up with some policy recommendations. These are our top lines of what we think would be great for policy in New York. And then we've been sharing it with different community members, state officials, and different kind of people. We're not trying to like be really, really like, this is what you should do. We're saying, hey, here's some recommendations for y'all to consider. And how does that work in New York? And we've done that from all the levels. So from grassroots levels to local community organizations in the Bronx and in Buffalo, in Syracuse, to going to Congress, Assemblywomen and men, to senators, to going to talk to, just showing people, sending them emails, and engaging people. I do a lot of speaking. I'm going to be speaking on the 24th on the Revel event in New York City, where we're going to talk about how do we engage and activate people as it's going to go to legislation. What can we do as a community? And that's really where we're engaging. We're not trying to be engaged. I mean, I'm not engaging with like the governor or anything like that, but I am engaging with the people, right? Because I always believe that the people tells the government. We've come to this place where we believe, like, I had somebody tell me this in the Bronx. They're like, well, we're just waiting to see what the government says. Like, what are the things? I'm like, no, we're in the process where we need to tell the government what we want. That's what we need to be. And I'm just trying to get, my whole team, my whole crew's trying to get out that this is what we should be doing as a community, not just in New York, but also in New Jersey, in Texas, in California. We're very involved in the policy that's being made here. That it's time for us as communities and outreach groups to step to that plate and tell our governments what we want and how we want this industry to be done.
So a lot of states and communities are welcoming you, inviting you to join. So you're looking around very carefully, you're seeing what's going on. Who do you think is doing it really well, and who do you think is doing it less than really well currently?
I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think anybody's doing it well. And I think that not in a mean way, but I think that we're just starting, we're trying to figure it out. And this is why, without any thought about what we're going to do in New York, or if there will be a people's dispensary in New York, what I really wanted to accomplish is to go into New York and really be part of the conversation, be thought partners with folks, so that New York does it right. You have you have Nevada, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and California that you can learn from. Like, these were really the first pancakes. Ever make a pancake? The first pancake looks like Mickey Mouse. The second pancake looks like... We're the first pancake. So New York actually has this really unique opportunity to be the second pancake. And if we can get the second pancake to be as equitable as possible, this will literally be the gold standard that every other city, every other state is going to look to create theirs. So I didn't know that when I was here in California. We were just kind of doing our own thing. And then when I realized, we should be part of this conversation to help governments, not to argue with them, but to help governments figure out what's most equitable, that's when we got really involved.
So what's the response of government been? I'm very interested, especially in New York. The Cuomo administration has not been terribly welcoming to cannabis until Cynthia Nixon arrived, as far as I'm concerned, which is about a year. And now they're all gung-ho. So what's their response been? Are they listening? Are they going to really want to create the gold standard? God, I hope they do.
I think they do. I could be wrong. I'm not in those rooms, but I think that they're really trying to get as much information. I've seen some of the people that are writing policy for the government at like Drug Policy Alliance conferences where they're listening. I see them going to like community events and listening. So I think that they are listening. Now, what they come up with, we don't know that yet. It feels like they're listening, but they could come out and be like, yeah, we trashed all of that. We're going to do our own thing. But I'm hoping that they're listening to our communities. I'm hoping that they're looking, it's a hard job. You got to write policy, not just for these folks. You got to write policy for everybody. So it's difficult, but I think they're listening to the communities. I think they understand. And I always say this, Nevada, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, all went adult use and never once talked about equity. They talked about how to spend the tax dollars, which is good. Like Colorado's like, we're going to do education. But nobody talked about equity, about what it was like to legalize an entire industry where literally so many Black and brown bodies are incarcerated for that. California was the first. And now we see that New York has taken that mantle. And I think that they are going to be the second pancake, or I hope so.
Me too. I'm so glad you're doing it in New York. I'm really happy about that. Now, I read somewhere that you also have an incubator to sort of help launch businesses. Can you tell me a little bit about how it works, who's in it, and of course, why you do it?
So we have what's called a community reinvestment fund. And so every dispensary that we open in every city has a community reinvestment fund. And we give as TPD, the like TPD Oakland or TPD Portland or TPD LA, which are going to be coming hopefully this year. We are part of our operating agreement is that we give 10% of our net profit into that community reinvestment fund for that community. So if we're in LA, 10% of our net profits at the end of the year go into that community reinvestment fund, and that community reinvestment fund then is powered by community, right? We don't run that, the community runs that. And it's a blended fund. So they can do 4 things, or more than 4 things, but it can give a grant. It can be like, hey, here's a small mom and pop bakery that wants to do edibles. They're not going to be able to pay back a big loan, but they only need $10,000 to start their business. So let's grant them the $10,000 because they're part of our mission. We can invest money. We can be like, wow, look at this great guy who just came out of prison, but is one of the best growers in Los Angeles County, but he needs startup money. But we know that he's a good cultivator because informal economy coming into formal economy is important. So let's invest $50,000 with him. We'll take 5% of his company. As he starts, we'll help him build out. We'll sell his very good cannabis in our stores. And that 5% that we've invested in him comes back into the community reinvestment fund. So now we're self-funding that community reinvestment fund through investment. Or I can say, I like this person. It's really great, but it's not really an investment we want, but we can definitely loan the money to them, right? So there's 3 ways in which you can be incubated by the community itself. On top of that, being able to give monies to the local communities that need rapid response funds. So let's say I'm a homeless group. I work with homeless people. It's going to be 32 degrees tonight, and I come to the reinvestment fund. I said, I need $1,000 to buy 1,000 pairs of socks. We should be able to give you a card right then and be like, here's $1,000, go buy your socks. And that way we can work and do community investment not only to help people that are in trouble, but also to help people that are trying to advance. And that's how the incubator works.
That's impressive. So in other words, when you talk about community investment, you're talking about more than putting pretty planters on the sidewalks. Is that correct?
Yes, I will never put a planter on any sidewalk. Mark my words. This is forever and ever. It's one of the things that bothers me the most when even in the applications that we have here in California, they say in the application, what's your beautification plan for the city? And it makes me really angry because I'm like, as much as I like flowers, there are homeless encampments all over Oakland and all over, there's Skid Row in LA. Why would you ask people who are going to be in an industry that's being touted to be a $500 billion industry to do planters, to beautify your city? Make them put money into the community, into the organizations that are doing that grassroots work. Because there's so many of them, and they sustain themselves on 501c3 money. And if you have an opportunity that they don't have to sustain on that, you can give them even more. And I want to tell you, think about it in terms of this. $500 billion as an industry. Let's say we hit that number as an industry. Wouldn't that be awesome? And let's say that of that, 30% is a net profit after 280E goes away. Let's just say 30%. So whatever that is, let's say 150 billion. Let's say that's your net. And you just give 10% of that to communities. That's like $15 billion. You're still making a lot of money. Why can't you give that money to the communities?
Well, I'm assuming you've asked that question to certain people who run certain corporations, and I'd like to know what's their answer.
It's very interesting. I get a lot of pushback. People say, oh, it can't be done, or, that's too much money to give away. And I just have to sit down and do the numbers with them and be like, here's how much the net is going to be. Here's how much that's after 10%. I'm like, this is still a lot of money. You can still give 10% and have a lot of money. And I'm like, to not do that is egregious. And I'm like, you're still going to make a lot of money. Fight me that you can't give 10% to the community that's actually making you the millions. Because those dispensaries sit in those communities, and the people going to those dispensaries are from the community. And that $10 million net profit you made off of that one dispensary came, more than likely 70% came from the people who sit around that dispensary. How dare you say you can't give 10%?
I'd love to, are any companies actually considering doing it that you've been speaking to? Because it seems almost impossible for me to imagine that they're saying yes to this.
I haven't met anybody yet. I've had some people do some semblance of that. We have seen some people that are doing like 2 or 3%, and it's not 10%, but it's something. But the thing is, and this is what we're really pushing for in New York, is that this is not something that just comes from our company. It's something that's institutionalized. We're institutionalizing the framework so that you have to, I don't know what it's going to be for New York, but that you should institutionalize that some of that money has to go back into community and beyond the sales tax. Because the thing people are always talking about, they're like, oh, we're going to, and this is the thing that cracks me up every time with every state. They're so excited about the sales tax. They're super excited about the sales tax. They're like, oh my God, we're going to have so much money to spend. You know who pays for the sales tax? That's right. The people, right? The people, not the dispensary. The dispensary, including me, we pass on the sales tax like for every other business. So imagine how much money you could get if you didn't just rely on the sales tax, if you relied on 10%. And so that's really, I'm hoping that we can have some kind of formal legislation or some kind of formalization of that back into communities, especially communities that have been harmed, especially communities that have been overly incarcerated. We cannot make billions, we cannot make $500 billion on cannabis when the last 70 years we've made $1 trillion on incarcerating people.
It is one of the biggest industries, incarceration in America. So does your business model have a name? Have you sort of put a framework around it yet?
It's called the TPD Equity Framework.
TPD, as in the People's Dispensary Equity Framework. Yeah. Love it. And is it visible anywhere online? Is it visible for the public?
Yes, we have had it visible to the public. We're redoing our website, but by next week it should be back online. And we have a white paper that talks about like, hey, if you want to do this for your company, download the white paper. It's the framework for you to do it. Everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to be different. And that's okay. But at least have it. And this is what I talk about a lot when I'm talking to other CEOs, like when I do stuff at like family offices or I speak at Nexus Global. I'm like, as an investor or a purchaser of cannabis or somebody who wants to invest in cannabis, the very first question you should ask the person that is asking for your money, whether it's to buy weed or to invest to make more money, is what's your equity plan? And if they say that their equity plan is to build planters, take your money somewhere else. It's about teaching people to expect that companies are going to do more than put in planters, right? And as investors and as consumers, also being like, what is your equity plan? And it better be good. It doesn't have to be mine, but it better be good.
Where would I see the white paper or the equity plan framework?
You can see it on the website at mytpd.com.
So, and my final question is, so when you think of yourself and all the businesses you run and the career you've had, do you consider yourself a capitalist? Do you consider yourself a socialist? Do you consider yourself a democratic socialist? How do you define your particular stance on this in terms of the very boring titles we have to describe the way we think about economics?
Gosh, I don't think I think about that at all. What I've always thought about when I've built businesses is how do I employ people so they can pay their mortgages and buy their kids formula. And I have a talent for being able to create businesses that make money. That's a very, I think, unique talent. And what I always think about is how is what I'm building helping the community. That's always been, so I don't know if that's capitalist, socialist, democratic socialist. All I know is it's about making sure that the most people benefit from all of the money that transacts in the USA.
Well, it sounds damn smart to me, and it sounds like it's an idea whose time has come, or that should at least be considered as seriously as the venture capital raise formula that we've known and live with, and for better or worse.
I think that there will always be room for venture capitalists, but I think that there's also rooms for community to build generational wealth. And I think that cannabis is one industry where that is incredibly possible.
I hope you're right, and I really want to thank you for joining me today. It's been fascinating. You're a really interesting woman, and I'm so proud of you for doing this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being on your show.
If you would like to be the first to know what Brave New Weed is up to, you can join our mailing list. Visit bravenewweed.com and sign up today.
So thank you so much, Christine, for joining me. I'm sorry I had a sinus infection at the time of that interview and my voice sounded even more nasal than it does today. But it was a pleasure listening to you and talking about these topics.
Well, it's really interesting because even in my conversation with Dr. Adinoff from the Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, we got into some of the platforms that the DFCR has, and they talk about this stuff. They talk about they even have plans to like allocate certain licensing, like earmarking licensing for underrepresented communities, like women in cannabis and people of color in cannabis, like certain ways that we really share this around to kind of prevent this massive corporatization, this massive takeover of things.
Well, some of the corporations could play ball. They could join in. It's not one or the other.
I mean, it honestly,
Joe, a lot of room for innovation here.
It goes back to my number one rule in life, which is don't be a dick, right? If you can live by the rule of don't be a dick to people in the world, like it's just gonna be good for everybody. And if you're out there and you got a shit ton of money and you think, hey, everybody's jumping on this cannabis train, let's fucking do it. Let's make our money. Let's like rip them over the coals. Like, don't be a dick.
Matthew, thank you for that incredible insight. That's a great way to end. Did you have something you wanted to end with?
I do, Joe. I have a special request for you. And this goes back, we were talking about gummy jam, talking about strains. I want to request that, can you please, it's been a long time since he's been on the show, I think episode 1, but can you please reach back out to Ethan Russo and can we get him back on the show?
Ethan, if you're listening, shoot me a mail. And yes, I mean, Ethan is a very busy guy and he's working a lot in the Czech Republic, so he's a little hard to reach these days.
Hey, that's not hard to reach at all. That's right. I'm 2.5 hours away from the Czech Republic.
What do you want to talk to him about?
Did you see the Frontiers Media article that he published? The case for the entourage effect and conventional breeding of clinical cannabis.
Of course. Yes.
It's such a good article, published on the 9th of January. I tweeted it out. I'll make sure to tweet it out again when the episode comes out. But this article is so, I'm a science wonk. And this goes so far over my head when he starts talking about chemovars and all of this crazy breeding techniques and genomics. And
the basic gist of that is the whole plant is better than the sum of its parts.
I agree. And so I would like to request, please, if you can, reach out to Ethan. I know he's a friend of yours. Let's get him back. I want him to explain to me in human terms, terms like fertile progeny of crossbreeding chemovars. Like, I need to know what that stuff means, man.
I really want to wonk out on this. I will do my best, okay?
I appreciate it, Joe.
Until we meet again, my friend.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.